The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
It is 7 minutes after 8. Welcome to the Forum at 8 here on SAFM, South Africa's news and information leader. Well, we've been reporting on it the whole morning. Strikes in the mining sector, they continue. There's a certain level of contagion. They're moving from one mine to another. The issue is wages. But what are the average earnings within this industry? The South African Institute of Race Relations, quoting Stats SA's quarterly employment statistics released in June this year, says not only do workers in the mining and quarrying industry earn more on average than workers in most other industries, but they also earn more per month than the average for the whole of the formal sector. That is under discussion then here on the program. We would appreciate hearing from you as well. 34701, that's our text line message. That's our line here, text message line. 34701. If there's anything that you'd like to text us this morning, each message will cost you R2. But also, you can send me an email, gwalax@sabc.co.za, gwalax@sabc.co.za, and a little later on, I'll take calls on 0891 104 208, 0891 104 208. Let me introduce my guest then on the program for you this morning. I'll start with, here with me in the studio, Georgina Alexander, researcher, politics and government and assets and incomes at the South African Institute of Race Relations. Georgina, good to have you on the program. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. Thanks very much for having me.
Thanks indeed. On the line, I'm joined by Terry Bell, is a labour expert and columnist. Good morning to you, Terry.
Good morning, Xolani.
Thank you very much for your time this morning. Also on the line, I'm joined from New Zealand by Dave Fekut. He's an international mining expert. He was here about a week or so ago, and we spoke to him on the program. Dave, good morning. Nice talking to you again.
Good morning.
Thanks indeed.
Good evening for me.
What time is it over there?
It's just after 6 p.m.
Oh, all right. No, thank you very much for your time. Thanks. We really appreciate it. Let me start with Georgina, because you issued this statement that I've been quoting here this morning about the average earnings in the mining industry, which you say are higher than most other industries. Give us the facts and figures here.
Well, it's like you said, that we found that when we went through the quarterly employment survey or statistics that are released by Stats SA, we found that miners earn more on average than workers in most other industries. The only exceptions to that would be electricity, gas and water sector and the community, social and personal services sector. But what we also saw is that their wage increased by 10.6%. So that's the second highest wage increase across the formal sectors in South Africa. So it seems that they are earning pretty decent salary comparatively to the rest of the formal sector in South Africa.
In rands and cents, what are we talking about? What sort of average?
In rands and cents, last year, February 2011, the mining and quarrying industry on average was earning 12,794 Rand. And we saw that increase to 14,151 Rand. To February 2012.
Now, these are the stats issued by June 2012. Is
Yes.
this a new thing, or has it been going on for a number of years? Have you been able to track it over a number of years, or is it just recently that these miners have had these kind of increases?
No, we can track it over many years. The quarterly employment statistics are released twice a year, I think it is, or once a year. But you can track them over time. But I think what is actually going on with the mining sector here is that it's not only about salaries. Mike Schussler did a survey, and he said that he found that miners are actually earning 10,500 Rand. That's including benefits. And then Lonman came out and said, yes, that's the correct statistic, going up to 11,000 Rand, including bonuses. But I think the problem here is that the average worker in South Africa supports 3 other people. So when you consider the wider issue of unemployment, miners are supporting families of maybe 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people. So when you consider that their salary or their wages per month is 10,500 Rand, you're going to take off money for benefits such as pensions, which is not money on your hands. You have to live off that as well as send money back home. And I think this is where the issue is coming, that the discounts break even.
Because it gets a little murky, muddy, if you will, because you say the average, 12,700?
No, the average for 2012 is 14,000.
If it is 14,000, why are they demanding 12,500, which is less than what they're earning?
Well, these statistics are an average of the entire mining and quarry sector. So it does take into account managers as well as executives. So I think from that perspective, it could be skewed a little bit. So we're not seeing what's really happening in a specific sector or category of miners working on specific mines. But generally, you can see that the miners are earning above average, which is very interesting. So what's happening in the other sectors that people aren't earning as much?
Right. Let's bring in Terry. Do you agree?
Well, no, to a degree, yes, but I'm always wary of statistics. In any case, also averages, as Georgina is perfectly correct. If you start bringing in executives, etc., some of whom in certain industries are paid up to 2 million rand a month, if you work it out in rand terms, it certainly does skew it. Yes, miners do earn on average more. In fact, the figure I have for 2011, the across-the-board average was 3,299 rand a month. That's for formal sector, properly negotiated, whereas mining is at the top with 4,311. Now, a lot of people have been rather disingenuous, including the former President F.W. de Klerk, who told the Cape Town Press Club here that the cost to company, well, cost to company includes everything. You can, fiddle the figures the way you like. The point is that the miners are talking in terms of cash in hand, and that's the important factor. Now, we need to look not so much at the average, perhaps the median wage, which is 50% above, 50% below, or better still, the minimum wage. Now, the minimum wage for mining is 4,311, and the minimum across the board, 3,299. There's another factor that's always forgotten in this thing, and that is that a large percentage in recent years of miners are contract workers supplied by labor brokers. Now, we don't know how often they work, how often they are on, what they're paid, what the conditions are. The other factor is that a lot of the mining companies have laid off workers who have continued to live around the mines in the hope of picking up jobs. And that's another factor. Right. Then you have, and Georgina is totally correct, it's not just about wages. The conditions around the mines in the so-called shack farms, which are one-room hovels that are set up by people who are farming them at 500 to 800 rand a month. That's another problem because there's no electricity, no water, no amenities whatsoever.
But how different is that? And I'm going to pick up on that point, Terry. How different is that from any other South African worker? Because even if it's a teacher, well, maybe the conditions are slightly different. But ordinary retailers will go back to the shacks and they suffer the same consequences. They live under the same environments and so on. Why is it that in the mining industry then we're seeing what we see now?
I think you have two factors. One is that on the platinum mines in particular, it's a lot worse because in the Royal Bafokeng, who own the land around there, have not allowed amenities to come in because they don't want these shacks. And I had a report came in yesterday from Martin Plaut, the man who's done a lot of work around here and wrote the recent thing on Who Runs South Africa. I forget the name of the book exactly. And he actually spent time there and said that the conditions in all our informal settlements are bad, but they're particularly bad around the platinum belt.
But here's the problem, or an issue that's been raised to me by particularly people within the platinum sector. They're saying they pay workers 1,800 rand living out allowance. And people, instead of using that allowance to improve the conditions where they live, i.e. the shacks, instead take that money home. They will send it to and just leave, with the bare minimum so that they are able just to get through and until they go back home.
Georgina has given correct analysis there too in terms of the number of people supported. There was a very good story actually in the City Press this week, referring to one of the miners from, I think it was near Dutschwa, who was supporting 15 people.
True.
Now, they will take whatever they can. If a miner is on a minimum wage, and let's assume in the platinum industry, incidentally, they're on average paid less than in the other metal and minerals mining industries. I don't know why, but anyhow, that's the situation. So they'll be sending home to support these families. They'll continue to live in these conditions. But we also need to look, and again I mentioned this whole question of contract workers and why, after nearly 20 years, the mining companies still have these single-sex hostels where they stack people up like artifacts against the wall. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Dave, let me bring you into this conversation. You were here, you made certain observations, and part of what you told us was that unless something is done and done urgently, the industry will collapse.
Well, I have to say I've been to South Africa 4 times professionally as a mine safety expert, either discussing with all the industry organizations, as I did on the first occasion back in 92, and on subsequent occasions I've made presentations as a couple of years ago to the NOSCON conference, which I think is about to take place or taking place again now. And from what I was reading, and of course there was a lot of information in the media about what was going on. I was watching television. I was only there for a week, but it doesn't take me long to to work out, how a mining industry is actually working at the moment. And I was shocked at what I was seeing. I was shocked about the conditions that the miners were living in. Underground mining is a physically demanding job. And it doesn't matter whether the guy is saving money to send it home and sacrificing himself. He's still got to eat enough food and live in good enough conditions to be able to perform. And these mining companies want these people to be productive. Now, how can you be productive if you live in a tin shack where the roof is leaking and the conditions through the winter time, who knows what those are? That is an abominable way to live. So that's the first point. And I don't know what the percentage are of who live in these conditions. I don't know who they are. If they're contract workers who are Xhosa speakers who come from the south, who are now working in the north, then they almost certainly don't have houses that they can move into. So a lot of these people seem to be at Longmen. They're the rock drillers who are on strike. It doesn't surprise me. They're pretty angry. And the other thing that nobody has mentioned yet, in terms of working conditions, there's one acid test. What is your chance of being killed at work in a coal mine or a platinum mine or a gold mine? And sadly, the statistics for South Africa as a whole, a miner has a 5 to 10 times greater likelihood of being killed at work underground than an Australian miner. Now, the Australian miner is the benchmark. They're the best. And they're also the best, incidentally, in terms of wages. So, any miner who knows this and thinks, well, why are we working for the same company, in many cases, as our brothers are working for in Australia, they're going to be upset about that, aren't they?
Well,
all
Dave,
of these factors come into play.
But Dave, the issue is, are you comparing apples with apples? Because others may argue the mines in South Africa are way too deep compared to the mines in Australia, and therefore the likelihood of rock falls are more here than they would be in Australia.
There are some risk factors. In Australia, a lot of mining is open cast, and that's generally safer. The mines in South Africa are deeper. But if you take all of these factors into account and still do an international comparison, then South Africa has a fair distance to catch up. I work in China a lot, and the Chinese have radically improved their safety standards in the last 10 years. And some mines, I would say, some mines that have been built in the last 10 years, the newer ones, have not had a single fatality. At Longmen, there were 6 fatalities, separate fatalities, in 2011. And there were 5 the year before. And what the 6 says to me, if you have 6 separate accidents where people are killed underground, then the company has lost control over safety practices. That's what it said to me as a mine safety expert. Now, I don't know the details, but I can say that. I would say that. So it's not... There are differences between countries. There's no doubt about there's difference within countries. The difference is between the coal, the platinum, and the gold sectors. And these are things that a government, the industry, and the unions have got to study and try and resolve. Now, South Africa has made a lot of progress in safety terms in the last few years. I think they've had a summit conference in 2003 in the industry, and they set a number of targets in terms of fatalities. They haven't been able to reach those targets, but they've certainly given a good effort. And this is just one factor. If you look at the burden of lung disease in South Africa, it is the highest in the world. And I can go into that, but I don't want to, why is that part of the conversation? I can come back to that if you like.
Indeed, maybe a little later on. But let me open the lines as well on 0891 104 208, 0891 104 208. Georgina, you wanted to add something about it? Or are you, given some of the analysis that's come through here, would you then have expected what's happening at Marikana?
A lot of debate is actually going around, was it to be expected, was it not to be expected? I think when you take into consideration all that's been said here so far this morning, it goes to the heart that it's not really about money. It's about something far more complex, and it's about treating people decently, actually, paying them a decent wage for decent work, enabling them to send money back home, but also live in circumstances where they can actually be more productive. Because if you're unhappy and you're living in a squalid environment, how are you expected to actually go and do an effective job if you're not getting sleep, maybe that compromises safety. So what I think has come out of the conversation so far is that there are a wealth of more complex issues at play than just money here.
And also, if I could come in there quickly, Xolani, I'm glad that Dave mentioned the whole thing of lung disease. Silicosis is a major danger. He'd also be aware, and I'd like him to comment, for example, on Lonmin, they're still using the old heavy drills, 45 kilos that you have to pick up, not the new hydraulic systems. And miners are aware that they're using old equipment, and it's incredibly difficult. It's an incredibly hard job. You suffer from repetitive strain, you suffer from noise, you suffer from your hearing being impaired. They know this. And they're also aware in all the rural areas there are now silicosis cases, a class action suit that's being put before the courts at the moment, because we now have thousands of miners, and in all these rural areas where miners have traditionally been recruited from, you've got people literally coughing their lungs out, and they're aware of that. So they know, and the death factor is also a factor, which means that you also have, let's face it, some pretty tough guys. Miners are not gentle people.
Right, I'll read some SMSs here as well that have come through. Perhaps let me just go straight to the line, starting with Prophet OJ in Mahikeng. Good morning to you, Prophet OJ.
Good morning, Xolani. I love you. I'm saved by the blood of God, Jesus Christ.
Thank you very much.
I just want to pose a question to your panelists today, and I would be so happy if they could answer it accurately for me. What determines, what informs an employer on the question of the living wage? What do we calculate? How do we get down to what we call a living wage in a company setup? Secondly, what would you say has informed the miners to determine the 12.5? What would the panelists say could have informed the miners to stick to 12.5? There should be something that has informed them that the 12.5 is what needs to be paid to them.
Prophet OJ, I thank you very much. Terry, do you want to attempt the questions?
Well, the problem with living wage is where do you set it and how do people live? I mean, the point is you could live in a shack in an informal settlement, and your transport costs would be high, and your basic food costs would be high. A number of people have done various estimates. The only one that I have is for 2010, where they said the living median wage, and that's for just one family, not an average family, and that, of course, again reduces the numbers for most of the mining community, at 4,105 Rand a month, which means that the minimum wage within the mining sector is only marginally above that. So, it's very difficult, but I would say that about 4,000, 4,500 a month would be a living wage for a family.
And in terms of why 12,500?
Well, I think that this is something that has come up. I mean, there's also a problem here. The rock drill operators are something of an elite. They're the real tough guys who get in there and do the drilling and whatnot. Without them, by the way, no mining can take place, which is why when they go on strike, everything stops. Rock drill operators tend to earn a bit more. And it's not a question of the rock drill operators. They're claiming the miners are pushing for 12,500 Rand across the board as the new minimum wage. That's what's actually being pushed for. Now, a number of people have made great political capital out of this, and we don't have to mention certain names, who've just gone in there and said, but you see, you've got someone like the former your General Secretary in the National Union of Mine Workers is a non-executive director, they just say director, who gets 3 million Rand a month or whatever as a director. And this is the sort of thing that you have to live with. So we're having a lot of political capital scored, and this is also stirring it up and saying, yes, we support your demand for a minimum wage of 12,500. Can they afford it? Well, that's arguable, but let's have a debate about that.
All right. Let's take Hassan Logat here in Johannesburg. Hassan, good morning.
Good morning.
Hi.
The points Terry raises are important, but I think we must consider also the lack of infrastructure in these communities, because often the water is polluted, the tailing dams are close to where communities live, houses are cracked, so really the infrastructure is non-existent. In 2003, communities there in Rustenburg area were demanding free health, wanting to use the hospital facilities provided by clinics. Often when workers get ill, they get pushed off. There's a big contestation whether they've got silicosis or whatever the illnesses are. So really, everything is a battle. So it's not simply about money. Is that there's no real social package. That mine workers don't live in a proper community, and when they take the social wages to up the take-home pay, as people have spoken of, So I really think that we when we talk simply about the money, we're missing the impact on communities, the environmental impacts, and all those others that gave rise to this.
Interesting. Let me quote Crispin Chikungo, who is a researcher of industrial and economic sociology at WITS. He was talking in an interview, and perhaps exactly what you're saying here, Hassan. He says, this is not surprising. Journalists are not taking much time and care to understand the connection between communities where these miners work, where these mine workers live and their workplace. What happens at the workplace and the community are inextricably connected. The miners live precarious lives, both at home and work. Most informal settlements are illegal, and they know they can be moved out at any time. Their conditions are so bad, such that they can hardly send their kids to school. They can hardly feed their families.
Yeah, but this is the study that benchmarks the Policy Gap 6, a review of platinum mining in Bojanala district, where they touched on this. In fact, all the story about how much they spend on education, they are unmarked traffic signs by railway crossing where trucks are going through. In fact, we must also talk about the importance of platinum, 1 ounce of platinum. So really, people are watching all these inequalities. You talk about how much a worker must get a month. What is it that a CEO gets? I think the Labour Research Service says they get about 55,000 rand on average per day. So really, inequality is also a big driver of conflict. But right. I recommend the benchmark study for that.
Sure, Hassan, thank you very much.
Actually, could I mention just one thing? The benchmark study in 2007, which is Policy Gap 1, they actually said there are harmful, and I'm quoting from it, there are harmful social, economic, and environmental impacts on local communities and mining communities. And the mining companies have yet to assume their responsibility for the negative consequences. And that was 2007. This was an explosion waiting to happen.
Georgina, do you agree? 300% increase then, is it justified on the basis of the benchmark studies?
What, the increase in the salaries?
Yes.
Oh, no, it's not justified. And as we did point out in the beginning of the thing, is that it's an average score. So it takes into account the CEO's salaries as well, which, as we know and has been discussed in the media before, that they're quite high. So I think what needs to be happening is that mining companies need to take a far greater responsibility for their workers.
Right, I'll read some SMSs up until 8:30 then. Go get some headlines. Come back, open the lines again. 0891 10428. We'll also hear, by the way, from Dave, Down Under. We'll hear how are they doing things there. What can we learn? 0891 10428. Somebody says these miners strike is led by Malema. He wants to gain political support, but 12,000 rand from 4,000 rand is unreasonable. Somebody says, why should a CEO get paid millions and in return laborers earning nothing? That's Arthur. Brachet in Cape Town says, why is executive remuneration benchmarked internationally and not workers' pay? This economic apartheid. Another one says, Cyril Ramaphosa sold me out to McDonald's, SAB, Coca-Cola, and Lawnmin at Codesa. These miners won't spend money on decent accommodation, and there are too many hangers-on in every family. There is also somebody who says, I must ask my analyst to give us an average view on job security, risk and production, average on foot soldiers and not management. Mike Newland says these mines cannot be expected to subsidize miners who decide to have more children than they can afford. The executives who are being paid hundreds of thousands or millions, how many people are they supporting? Come on, guys. That's Carl. And there's also another one that says those statistics are wrong. On Saturday, SABC News showed a payslip of a miner who earns 4,000 rand. Those people are underpaid. Finish and cloud. That's Materega on SMS. Another one says these miners' strike is led by Malema. Okay, we've seen that. Unions in general are slowly losing steam. Allegations that they are selling out are not new. It may get worse before it gets better. Stay in KZN. I'll read more of your SMSs and emails.
8 with Xolani Gwala.
Thank you, Segele Edward. Thanks indeed. We are talking here about the demands in the mining sector. We're talking earnings. What are the earnings then? And of course, some of the demands that are coming through there, are they justified in your view? We'll go to the lines in a minute. But as I said, perhaps let me just start off by reading one or two emails here because there's been a lot of reaction, particularly to the stats. Let me start with an email from Tongo. What's happening here? I'm losing my... all right, I seem to have a slight email problem. I'll open the emails in a minute. In fact, yeah, it's back. Tongo says, those stats are obviously cooked. Rock drill operators generate profits. Let's change the vulture culture of mining management. They tell us if the rock drillers don't come to work, the mine may close. If they are that important, take care of them then, for God's sake. Each mine must provide accommodation, houses, schools. It's a model that is required. The same mining houses do things in RSA that they don't do anywhere else in the world. The mining management are not decent people, if they are people at all. That's according to Tongo on email. There's an issue of the stats here, and I'm going to ask Georgina to respond to that. Also, another one coming through from Kwezi Jonas, who says, I don't believe this 12,700 average. Average is what a joke. I want to know how much do executives earn versus the productivity. South African blue-collar labor is cheap, like in China. The big difference is our white-collar workers. They are unproductive, they can't manage, no vision, and they are expensive. Laptops, cars, and bonuses. Can somebody compare our white-collar workers from the so-called professionals to executives with our Asian counterparts, then compare the blue-collar workers? That's an email from Kwezi Jonas. Another one has come through from, who's this? Charles in Durban, who says, you need representative population to achieve reliable and valid research result. She concedes that she does not know the salary composition of managers and supervisors, which could distort the data. So how can she present the result as research about the striking workers? The average salary is not representative and therefore neither valid nor reliable. Charles in Durban. I'll look at some more emails in a minute, but Georgina, clearly people are contesting the validity of the research.
Yes, and I do understand that it seems a bit counterintuitive, especially what's going on in Marikana. But I would like to state I did not put out this letter or this research to impact as a direct comment on what's going on in Marikana, merely because I was looking at the stats and it seemed that mining they do a lot better than any of the other formal sector non-agricultural industries. So the stats also, they come from Statistics SA. This is not me making them up. It's not me going around and just finding stats out of the sky and putting them down on a piece of paper. This is from the quarterly employment statistics from Statistics SA. And while it is important to state that it is an average, so it does take into account the executives and the managers' pays, but I also did state that in the beginning. So I'm not trying to distort anything. It was merely an interesting comparison to see that mining is doing a lot better than manufacturing or construction or wholesale, and that's an important point.
And certainly more than agriculture.
Very much so.
Sure.
Could I come in there?
Yeah, please, go ahead, Dave.
Well, the point is that if you look at the main mining countries across the globe, then the miners are at the top of the wages league table. And this is not surprising because when you realize what an essential activity it is, and let's face it, without mining of all the range of minerals and energy sources, we wouldn't have modern civilization. And apart from that, these guys are tough guys, as has been said, and they will fight for their rights, and they have done. They have done it in every country, especially where they're organized into trade unions, and they do it. So they push their wages up. It's been recognized. But the other problem that is faced, of course, in every mining industry and by every trade union negotiator, and I can see that this has been a difficulty for the NUM, is that there are a lot of other people who work on the surface in other underground jobs who are paid less. And if the NUM has been pursuing a strategy of trying to take everybody up, the lower paid as well, then what that tends to do is flatten out the differential with the face workers or the rock drillers. And so what a wise trade union leader has to do is to balance these two pressures. And what I think has happened in South Africa is that the rock drillers have felt that they have not been properly rewarded in recent times, so they've taken action. And some of them have even joined a radical breakaway from the NUM. So if there is going to be a resolution of this issue in the South African mining industry, then all the parties, including the Chamber of Mines and the other employers, will have to take this into account. There is clearly a whole seam of anger that is built up amongst these essential workers underground.
Sure.
And this has happened in just about every other mining country over the last 100 years. And if you look at the background of the miners' strikes in Britain, this is exactly what was going on. And the government was wrestling with it there. So it doesn't matter where it is. Perhaps the only place that it is not a problem is in Australia. But that's because the country is booming. It's got huge markets in China and India. It's got a shortage of labor. So the wages have zoomed up to US $120,000 a year to probably $150,000, depending on what somebody does. In New Zealand, where we don't have that kind of demand, the wages are less. They're about 100,000 New Zealand dollars, which is about 80,000 Australian. So it affects different countries in different ways, and the global market essentially determines the overall background. That's what we haven't talked about up to this point, because the reality is that all the mining industries have been booming in recent years. Look at the price of gold. If you look at the cost of production versus the price of gold, the selling price, it is so low, even now after the gold price has fallen back. The same thing was true of platinum. And of course, in South Africa, you have beneficiation. You're adding value actually in your own country, which is a very wise strategy, because in the past, all the beneficiation has been done in the north of the globe. And the north of the globe has benefited mainly from the products from the South African mining industry historically. That's where it's gone. Most countries that mine minerals, they use their own resources. So China uses all its coal, and it actually imports coal from Australia and other countries. The US uses all its own coal, except in some niche markets they export it. If they can make more money for coking coal, then they'll send it to China. But most of the major mining countries have actually used their own mineral product inside their own economy and imported more. South Africa and Australia are exporting countries, and so the benefits have actually been lodged, in effect, in the north of the globe. And this is where you need to have some kind of concept of the north-south. And I think that's what is part of the background picture to all of this.
All right. Well, it's very interesting indeed. Mike is in Newlands. Mike, good morning.
Good morning, Scolani.
Hi,
thanks for taking my call. So you're just agreeing with your panelists, actually. I think it's important to make comparisons with other countries, but I'm a bit scared to do that. Every country is different. We're dealing with South Africa, and I think the mistake here is to a large degree that the union, or the mining houses, have allowed to a large degree the unions to dictate to them as to what the workers want and what the workers need. And the unions have obviously blatantly, completely failed in this regard. They've totally misunderstood the demands and the needs of the miners, and that's highlighted by the conditions in which they live and so on. And I think that what's going to happen to a large degree is the mining houses have actually got to take responsibility for their staff again. I think the unions should be sidelined, and then I think the mining houses should deal directly, which seems to be the case at the moment. The unions want to speak to the mining houses. And I think if they form some sort of a bond, get rid of the unions, let's sit down and talk about it. And I think it's really in the mining houses' interest to have workers that are happy. But they've had to listen to the unions and the unions' demands. And I think they've learned, I certainly learned a big lesson here. And I think that nobody wants this kind of nightmarish situation we have, and we have to understand better the needs of the employees in the mine industry. Thanks, Kalani.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Mike in Newlands. Let me take Awetu in East London. Awetu, hello.
Hello, Kalani. Thanks for taking my call.
You're most welcome.
Quickly, 2 points. My first point has already been responded to a bit by one of your panelists, but it's around the stats. But the point I want to make around the stats is that using averages tends to distort the actual stats. Now, if you pronounce those stats and to say that workers in the mining sector actually earn above the average compared to other sectors, tends to lead the discussion into an astray kind of discussion, because if you accept the limitations of the stats in a country like South Africa with high inequality, when you average between executives executives and general workers, of course you are going to get distorted stats.
All right. I hear that point. Let me just come in on that point because, and I hear that point, but you must also keep in mind the fact that these averages come from Stats SA. Now, that is the only authority. In fact, these very same stats are used by our government to plan. So I take your point. Yeah.
It's not the stats. It's the methodology utilized where you average between executives and general workers, which means you take the highest paid and you average with the lowest paid. A country that has a high inequality between the lowest paid and the highest paid, which means in essence you get stats that say the lowest paid is actually on, which looks as if he's paid higher, and the highest paid looks on average if he's paid lower, because when you average them and you try to get to middle ground, you actually get that distortion. Now the problem, which is not the problem with this distortion, is that what it does, it creates a debate that says the workers in the mining sector are unreasonable because on average they earn much higher than workers in other sectors, which is in essence, when you go to the detail, not true, because and then the stats become misleading in this case.
Right.
When quoted as authority, we know the stats are correct, but the methodology to average them then distorts the actual outcome.
All right.
Now, the last point,
yes,
Kolani, very quickly, is that in this case, the second part is that the casualization of labor and the use of labor brokers in the mining sector, and how the mining sector does not conform to minimum wages and other things, this also needs attention, because as you go to this stats, there are a lot of workers who fall outside of the stats because they are employed by labor brokers, and also that some companies refuse to pay the minimum wages.
That's an important point. Sorry, that's an important point because in Lonmin, I've got to quickly move on, because in Lonmin alone, as far as I understand, there are 28,000 workers, but also 10,000 contract workers. So you're dealing with 38,000 there. Lonmin, 28,000, but also there are contract workers, and they're in the region of about 10,000. Tabiso in Soweto, hello.
For me, the mine worker, the mine boss in South Africa is the most arrogant employer I've ever seen, Just compare, for instance, with Botswana, where the government of Botswana is getting 51% profit. They're getting 100% profit, so there's no reason to exploit the workers the way they do. And, to compare a mine worker with a construction worker, for me, it's absurd. We're not talking about South Africa. These mine bosses have listed their companies in the London Stock Exchange. They have globalized. So for me, the proper comparison will be to compare them with his peers. And his peers, not a construction worker in South Africa, is a miner all over the world. And I'm saying that they're earning pittance. And it's not correct to say that, they're earning 12, the salary they're demanding is high. We have seen the pay slip all over the show. They're earning as little as 3,000 rand. So for me, I think that these statistics, we must be suspicious of them, because it seems as if, they are there to subjugate miners, to create the impression to the broader South Africa that these people are striking for nothing. And if you look at the miners there, they are only black people. They may think that they're only black people just back to show that those jobs are not attractive to people who are previously advantaged, you understand. They also highlight, Kolani, the history of this country, that of colonialism. South African miners, they've colonized these countries. They've been, getting profit with impunity. We cannot allow this argument that they must be compared with construction workers. They must be compared with a miner in Australia, in New Zealand, all over the world. They've listed in the stock exchange, and we have lost 27% in GDP because of that listing. Those are global companies, Kolani.
Okay, Tabiso in Soweto, thank you. Budima Namela of the Young Communist League, good morning.
Kolani, and good morning to your panelists. Look, the first thing is that we believe that there needs to be a general investigation into the conditions and wages of workers in our country, and comparatively speaking to economies that are at the same scale with that of South Africa. And if you look at, for instance, what has been happening for the last 5 to 7 years in countries such as Brazil, in countries such as China, real wages of workers have been on the increase, and the social package, which means healthcare, education, and all those things, have basically also been much more stable. And we think that investigation, which has extensively happened in the mining sector, needs to extend into the other sectors, so that we begin to say, are the demands for workers reasonable or not? What would be the impact of those into the economy? But also look into what the senior executives, earns, because that has perpetuated the inequality in South Africa, which has, inevitably posed worker against, management. And I don't think that we need to continue with this narrative that says it's a battle between the trade unions and amongst workers. It is a battle for a better life on the part of workers. The second thing is that we believe as the Young Communist League that the whole issue, of course, safety levels in our mines have somewhat increased, but we still lose more lives. And that's why we called for over the weekend in our meeting for the revoking of mining licenses where lives are lost. And this is an international practice. We do not accept an explanation that says our economy will fall and the jobs will be lost. We think lives are more important than some of the counter arguments that have been presented. In the general, we think that it's very important for a general application of a minimum wage that is set late, which will be the basis of determining, how much is a real wage in our economy in all the sectors. And part of the, review of labor legislation will have to look into the role of labor brokers, because I think that they've played a significant role in worsening the situation, for instance, in Lonmin, but also generally in many of the other sectors of our economy.
Budimana Mela of the Young Communist League, thank you very much. Let me just take this one last call, then take a commercial break from Sig in Randburg, who's been on the line for a while. Sig, hello.
Thank you very much, Kulani. Kulani, higher wages mean higher working costs, and they mean lower mine profits, and they mean mine losses, and mines don't make losses. They therefore will retrench workers. This is a lesson which the NUM learned very early in the days when Ramaphosa, when he was still a very honest trade union leader, when he marched on the Chamber of Mines and he fought retrenchments. But he eventually he saw the sense that it is pointless to ask for higher wages when you've got to fight retrenchments afterwards. And this Australian guest of yours, if he went to those of our mines which are really comparable with the Australian mines, like Palabora, open cast mines and stuff like that. If he went to them, I'm sure he would find that their wages are very, very comparable with the Australian and Canadian wages as well. And so he mustn't come to us and tell us to retrench half of our industry. These are hundreds of thousands of workers who are earning these incredibly miserable wages, and my heart goes out to them. But Ramaphosa learned the lesson when he was still an honest union leader.
All right, that's Sig in Randburg. I'll take a commercial break, come back, look at the emails, and wrap up lots of your emails. Stay tuned.
The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
Right, let me look at some emails, then wrap up. There's Maple Semolina, who says, people are exploited to make few whites and blacks politicians rich, and until we bring policies that are going to address these inequalities, we are highly likely to see more violent protest, because it is only the language our government understands. That's Maple Semolina on email this morning. Another email came through from Movement for Justice, Universal Justice that is. It says, to suggest that 300% increase is unreasonable is not valid, because the starting base has been so low that to speak in terms of a percentage increase is therefore unjust and unconscionable. Secondly, why insist on NUM to represent the majority mine workers if the mine workers do not want NUM to represent them? That's Ahmed Motir, director of the Movement for Universal Justice on email. Another one came through from Vuyisane, who says the stats presented by the lady are not reliable and fair for the simple reasons that you cannot compare executives with your normal worker because they are not paid the same rate. Please tell the lady they must compare apples with apples, not the other way around. CEOs are taking or getting paid lucrative salaries and bonuses which your normal mine worker is not entitled to. That's Vuyisani on email. Another email, perhaps just one or two to wrap up. It comes through from Stan Litlizio, who says, this is another highlight of the failures of the ANC-led black government. The ANC leadership since 1994 must be ashamed. Wandi Le on email says, how do your analysts analysts justify the fact that NUM Secretary General Frans Malene earns 1.4 million rand annually. Old boy unionist Cyril Ramaphosa is a shareholder to the same mine that he wants against their attitudes towards miners. ANC sold us to the highest bidder, one delay in Cape Town on email. Perhaps the last one here comes from Ernest in Tabazimbi, who says some of these miners are just showing the media the net pay and are failing to disclose the fact that Lesotho and Mozambique citizens have as much as 3,000 rand deducted as deferred pay, and they will get this money from their respective countries when they go on leave. Right, I need to get closing comments here, perhaps starting with you here, Georgina.
Well, I'd just like to say that wages for miners are far more complex than just money. It takes into account safety issues, living conditions, supporting families back at home. And the mining companies really need to take cognizance of this fact and take these factors into account when they're renegotiating the wages.
Dave?
Well, I just want to make one point, and it's in relation to miners' health. The Department of Labour of South Africa has come up with a figure of 480,000 former gold miners with silicosis. Now, these people have gone back to their own countries. Quite often they're in rural areas with no health support apart from their wives. That's a shocking figure because that means that if you include the other mining sectors, then the lung disease burden of South Africa is higher than it is in China, where it's huge indeed. But there's one point that I would like to make as well, which is an offer from the Chinese government via me. They asked me to make it. And that is that they have miners' hospitals which actually treat lung disease. They're the only ones really in the world that do it. It's not generally done in Western countries. And they would be happy for some South African miners, all miners with lung disease, to be treated, especially at the Bedaihe Hospital on the East Coast.
Sure.
That could be a beginning. And, as the problem is so large, I think the transfer of expertise from China to South Africa would be much more effective.
Okay. Dave, thank you. Terry?
Well, very briefly, 2 points. One is the most important thing is to know how many miners are on the minimum wage and how much is being paid by labor brokers. And the second thing is you keep hearing this thing being an illegal strike. There are no such things as illegal strikes since the demise of the Masters and Servants Act. We have unprotected or wildcat strikes, and this is what we're dealing with now, which are incredibly dangerous and difficult for the miners themselves because they know there's no pay, no work, no pay, etc. So they're not illegal, and the unions have fallen down by not being able to come back on this wages issue and say, hang on a minute, this is what the labor brokers are paying. These so many thousands of miners are on the minimum wage, which is 4,000 whatever. That's what needed to happen. Okay. Unfortunately, it didn't.
Terry Bell, Labour expert and columnist, I thank you for your time this morning. Also, I would like to thank Dave Fakert. He's an international mining expert from New Zealand, talking to us from down under. Georgina Alexander, researcher politics and government and assets and incomes at South African Institute of Race Relations. Thanks indeed, here with me in the studio. Would like to thank the team as well. Our producers Misho Shandlale, Wisana Makubele, senior producers Lungile Mabaso and Chili Chibase, Forum 8 producer Nomalizo Mandela, technical producer Judy Mutupi, chief producer Buzilukoto, executive producers Busi Chane and Oprah Chia. My name is Xolani Gwala. I'll be back again for you tomorrow, 6 to 9 here on SAFM. Coming up then, Sigela Lomkabadelo on Morning Talk. Cheers from all of you 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 on Morning